Okay, thanks very much, Mike. Okay, thanks to the Young Scholar Association for having me here. I really appreciate this opportunity to talk to younger people. Uh, I always expect, fresh questions and a different perspective of things. And I'm going to talk about a topic that I think is not so well known, and that's monetary plurality. This word comes from French, so I imagine a better translation into English would be plurality of money. I don't know, but well, that's the name it's became known for. Let me introduce myself first. My name is Georgina Gomez. I'm from Argentina originally. I'm based in the Netherlands at the Institute of Social Studies of Erasmus University of Rotterdam. I came here to do my PhD, and well, I stayed and then I kept on staying. And now I'm associate professor. I put here some pictures of my last book is this one on monetary plurality that I have just heard that Mike has actually read it. And in the middle, you see the journal that I'm part of the editorial board, International Journal of Community Currency Research. We are in volume 23 at the moment. And if you're really interested in this topic, that's probably the place to be. It's completely open. So you have access from at all times. It's free to publish also. And well, we actually struggle to keep it like that. We think it's really important to be able to share knowledge. We've got lots of practitioners, not only scholars that publish there, and to keep knowledge, open for everybody. So this is what I'm going to talk about. Now, what is it? Monetary plurality. What are we talking about? We are taught, I was trained as an economist myself, and if you pick up any book of economics, they usually have a chapter on money, and the first few lines will say something like money is what performs as means of payment, unit of account, etc. For usually it's three functions or four functions depending on the author, means of settlement, sorry. And we are used to thinking that one country would have one money, right? So if you go to the US, you will pay in US dollars. If you go to Kenya, you will pay in shillings, and so on. So one country, one money. And money is something that comes from the central bank. So this is something that we are taught as, that looks so evident that nobody actually questions that. However, if you study history, what you see is that this idea of one country, one money is actually a very new institution. It hasn't been around for more than, well, not even 200 years. When countries could actually settle their sovereignty and express their sovereignty through having one type of money and one central bank. But as a matter of fact, monetary plurality has been pervasive in history and across the globe, and this continues. So for people that study monetary plurality, as a matter of fact, what we see this is as part of a continuity, that the idea of one country, one money has never completely settled anywhere. And what you find is that any country has what we call the currency circuits. I will expand on these two concepts in a second, and complementary currencies. So this is something that if you look really well in your country, you will probably have, sure, a national or regular currency, the one that the central bank gets, but then you have these groups of agents that make their own complementary currency system, the CCS. Now, this group of agents voluntarily accept something else that is usually means of payment, um, and it circulates in parallel to the national or regular currency. So what you have is specific circuits of groups of agents that accept different means of payment for specific uh, goods or services or for different functions. So We go from what Polanyi would have said, well, this is the all-purpose money, the money that we can use to pay for anything and as reserve of value. But then we have these smaller, usually currencies, that we can use for specific things. So most of us would accumulate miles or points in a supermarket, and then we get something for them. We get perhaps a fidelity systems. These are the private ones, but then we have the social ones. So we can buy vouchers that we can give to other people, gift vouchers, or we can donate in specific things and so on. And these are all complementary currencies. Now, some of them are more basic than others. Oh, so well, when we speak of a currency circuit, is precisely those that you can recirculate. So you can get a haircut if you provide as a favor, which is not a favor, to help somebody move, for example. And this person helps somebody else fix a bicycle or for some homegrown food. And that one would exchange, and we see how when we can build this circuit, we can connect these various exchanges with a currency that is not necessarily the currency, the national currency. And you might say, well, why would we do that? And that is because either we don't want to use the currency of the government for ideological reasons, or we simply don't have it. And let's think about poor people that do not necessarily have such good access to the official currency, or we are using a type of means of payment that is only valid for certain things, or we live in a remote area where there isn't enough currency, but it's common for people to exchange favors, and exchanging favors is limited to the amount of people we can remember, of course. So there is a variety of reasons why we may want to use a different currency. And at the same time, it's an opportunity for us to rethink who can make money and what is a currency. Now, going to this question, who can create money? Well, of course, the government, the central bank. Banks create money. They can create all sorts of instruments to make payments and reserve store value. But also people in the third sector and grassroots organizations, they can create things that look like money. And they are based either on mutual agreements, like, okay, I agree to accept this money as long as my neighbors do. So it's a system that has a lot of reciprocity involved, or as resources. Yeah. And if you combine all of them, and I would encourage people to start thinking, well, what are the means of payments that I have used in the last week? And perhaps they have used various points, various vouchers, food vouchers, vouchers from the government, vouchers from donations that they have received from private companies, or they have received things and given things in exchange. And then perhaps it was not a bad idea. It would have been a good idea, in fact, to create a colored paper, an IOU, on paper or on or digitally, that would enable us to do this. So if we are in the middle if we are a household that is in the middle of different exchanges with different means of exchange and different ways of storing value, we would have a picture that in an economy with multiple currencies looks like this one. So we would use a particular voucher to pay for milk, but a different kind of means of payment to pay for the school, etc., etc. Now, perhaps some of you would still find that this is a little bit weird. But this is something that has become popular, or, well, the idea has expanded to many countries. Ciclos is a software that enables precisely these exchanges. And at the moment, there are 1,800 communities worldwide using this software to exchange things with each other. You may have heard, I'm quite sure, of Bitcoin. Bitcoin is, of course, the largest one in terms of users and in terms of transactions. But what you don't see in the Bitcoin is the community, when in fact what these complementary currencies help us to do is to reconnect the communities. So in Bristol Pound in the UK, the idea was precisely to promote the buy local, to have a type of money that doesn't leave the region. You have all sorts of points or systems with tokens and vouchers to exchange specific things. Sardex in Sardinia in Italy is also very big at the moment. It has 5,000 users. And because it's an island, they wanted to promote more the economy of the island. Um, and so on. I will give a few examples just to show some of the things that you can do with this system. First, let me emphasize that we are talking about an instrument. Complementary currency systems are usually small in scale. They usually have a limited number of products and services that you can buy with it. You're not going to pay Shell or Esso for petrol with these currencies most of the time. But if you think about poorer households, they can make the difference between having food, access to food, food security, better food, and so on. As they are a small idea, sometimes the organizers think that they are going to grow enormously. And what happens is that enthusiasm tends to dwindle, and many of them die in the first year. The cases I'm going to refer to, all of them have been quite successful and have passed that threshold. In developed countries, you usually find mostly people that want to question the lifestyle, the unsustainable lifestyle, and all this consumerism, and they want to reconnect with their community. So they say, well, we participate in this network with alternative currencies, and they tend to use the word alternative much more than complementary, because they are looking for the like-minded, yeah, people that would like a I don't know, a different type of exchange, which is not a non-capital, a capitalist exchange. In less developed countries, the goal of income diversification of households is very important, and this is in a way an extra. It's part of their livelihoods, yeah. So it's an extra income that allows people to live a bit better. Now, if you see it historically, they have existed in almost every country in the last 1,000 years, but apart from that, they were very disseminated, very common during the Depression in the US. During the World Wars, there were also local means of payment created by municipalities and so on. In Canada, near Vancouver, somebody restarted them in 1985 during a crisis of the local economy, and with the name of LETS, Local Exchange and Trading Systems. And with this name of LETS, they were picked up in the UK during the 90s, they multiplied, etc., etc. At some point, there were, as I said, thousands of different centers and complementary currency systems that operate at local levels. Governments tend not to like them, so we have seen that some governments have basically banned them. In some countries like Kenya, people were arrested, afterwards released, of course, but for a while they spent a couple of nights in jail because they were forging money, and only the central government is allowed to make money. But as I said, this is something that it's more prominent in some countries than in others. Most countries do not have a legislation in which it is clearly specified what is money, who can make it, and more than that, who cannot make it, or when it's illegal to make money that is not the official money. Um, so what do they do? Well, I spoke a lot about local economic development and the local economy. So this is one of the things that figures very prominently that you can do with a type of money that doesn't leave your area. But also, when you want to direct consumption and behavior towards a specific kind of behavior, for example, and more environmentally friendly behavior. So you can reward certain types of actions like recycling, for example, or in terms of reconnecting, the social exchange. I do 1 hour of babysitting if you do 1 hour of gardening. And why not if what I like is babysitting and what you like is gardening? So we can exchange our time. And this is called time banks, and it's pretty much well known. I think in terms of numbers, it's the one that is most common that people would know more about. And I spoke of local economy and buy local and consume local. Well, if you think of your region as a bucket, there is a number of things, of inflows, yeah, into your region, from tourism, from selling labor of people that lives in a locality, and so on. But there are also some leaks, yeah. So the New Economics Foundation has this idea of the plugging the leaks. And how do you do that? By keeping most of the exchanges, most expenses done by the households that live in a certain area within the area. So instead of buying things from Coca-Cola, a big transnational, you would only buy products that have been made in the locality or in local stores and so on. And how do you do that? Well, by creating means of payment that are only valid, that can only be used within your economy. Oops. So Sardex, for example, in Sardinia, I said this is one of the largest ones in terms of number. What happens? You have this supplier that has things to sell, and there are many clients around, but oops, nobody has money. So at the end of the story is the supplier keeps his goods and the client goes hungry, yeah, if it's food, or goes with an unsatisfied need or consumption. Whereas with complementary currencies, if there is sufficient trust, the case of Sardinia is what we call a mutual credit system, the supplier gives this good, this fragile box, to the client, and what happens is that the client will have a debt with the supplier of 100, but perhaps somebody else in the region owes this client 100. So if we find a way of connecting the three of them, then the total balance will be always zero. So in a mutual credit system like this one, the balance among all the members in the whole network is always zero. We owe and lend to each other all the time. Now, when we create this debt, in fact, we are creating money, yeah, as the monetization of a debt-credit relationship. I will skip the rest. Of course, this requires trust, a certain morality. This is always so. Let me speak about a few examples. How am I doing with time? Okay, it's already 4:30. Now,
you're doing great.
Yeah, okay. Well, one possibility, of course, is delinking completely from the capitalist economy, but this is not a path that many communities opt to go, but it is possible. So there's this community in India, Auroville, they have their own money. So this is a community where there's a lot of spirituality, and it's a place of worship. But since they have decided that part of their spiritual lifestyle is to reduce the relations, the capitalist relations, as much as possible, among other things, they issue their own money that you can only use in the community of Auroville in Chennai in India. Now, another possibility is to relink people within the locality. And here you have the Bristol pound. And this was an initiative that was launched by the local government. The guy in the middle is the mayor of Bristol. In 2012, they launched with a lot of publicity this pound, their own pound, and it has a lot of symbols, even in the banknotes that they issued, um, that promote the identity of Bristol. It's a village, well, a city in the UK with quite a strong local identity. And they said, well, the next step is to also promote exchanges in and within our community. In Palmas, in Brazil, the north of Brazil, northeast, sorry, probably the poorest area in Brazil, a community started with this principle of having owing and lending to each other. Eventually, this developed as what they called afterwards a community bank. And at some point, the community banks started issuing these banknotes. You see them here in the photograph. They were called palmas. The unit of account was called palmas. And it was something that people in this community could use to pay to each other, but also to give credits to buy small things, usually to produce. So in terms of seeds, food produced in the community, and so on. And this was one of the cases in which the government strongly disliked that these people were making their own money. They were sued, prosecuted. And as a matter of fact, the key lawyer of this organization could show that we were dealing with a favela, a slum, a group of people that have always been excluded from any kind of governance in Brazil, excluded from the economy. And basically the line of defense of the lawyer was, if these people have been excluded from anything that has been your economic and your social system, leave us alone, because we are also excluded from the use of your official money, that at that time was the reais. And this was a leading case because this is a line of defense that became used in subsequent cases in which people said, very poor people said, we've always been excluded. So how come you find out now, you complain now that we are making our own money? Of course, why not? It was just within the rules of the game that you imposed on us. So the case of Palmas was very important, not only in the fact that there were a few hundreds of these community banks afterwards, but in the sense that they set a precedent on how exclusion from the system could lead to things like also creating money and their own systems of exchange. You might say, okay, this works in Brazil, but because it's a place where there is so many poor communities. But it's important to keep in mind that it also works in other countries. They are very extended in France, for example. There are a few hundred of them in France, but more with a system of democratizing who create. I'm sorry, this is in Spanish. I forgot to translate it. With the idea of devolving, the rights to create power to the communities as well, to be able to decide themselves what they want to use and how they want to use their own resources. One of the oldest ones is in Switzerland, another very rich country where you would say, why is this necessary? Well, wir, which means us, we in German, the Wir Bank in Switzerland is a business-to-business association, and what they do is to give credits to each other. So especially in times of recession, when companies do not have as much, are not as fluid in terms of money or as liquid as they would like, they can simply take things from other members as a credit, and then somebody else repays. So they create this circle of which I was describing earlier, in which we'll create a kind of a clearing system. It has about 3,000 members. It's fluctuating, but VIR has become a bank in the meantime, and it has about 3,000 members who are really active and that lend and owe things to each other with very similar principles as any regular bank, but they use their own accountancy system, in fact, within the community of businessmen. Most of them are men, by the way. It's not, I'm not using men in this case as it's males. There's a very similar scheme to that one in Nantes, in France, in Amsterdam, in the Netherlands. This one in the east of Amsterdam, the idea was to integrate foreigners. It didn't quite work as it was expected, but it did create a system in which, well, you can fix your bike by providing cakes. Yeah, so it's always the very same idea. Now, there's also one that is the environmental path. On this one, Brazil has always also been a pioneer. Unfortunately, this is a case in the city of Curitiba that is not so well documented, so you need to really dig to find information on it. But it came from a mayor who said, well, in this region, we are wasting money, we are wasting, resources, food, because we can produce more food than we can actually sell. At the same time, there are people that are hungry. At the same time, we need solid waste management systems. The city government is broke. And the mayor at that time, early 90s, said, well, what we need is to connect these various needs and supplies. For example, somebody can recycle. Oh, well, this is not how it's supposed to be. Somebody can get to, well, I'm not sure what's going on. People would recycle waste in the city and get tokens, and with these tokens they could travel in the buses of the city. They could buy some of this local food that, as I said, would have been wasted, and they could also buy school utensils, which actually helped a lot of people be able to send their children to school. So if this worked, sorry about that. Well, we were in the early 90s in Brazil, and this was a city that had a lot of recycling and so on. It was a bit better, they said, oops, than regular money, because it created a monetary incentive for poor households to help to go through garbage and help in recycling waste. At the same time, the government could improve the condition of the city without incurring in new public debts, which released income to take care of other things that city governments often need to take care of. And of course, this created a multiplier effect in the region in and around the city of Curitiba. Well, I'm not sure what that happens. Sorry for that. So after 3 years, it had a significant impact, but after 3 years, the government changed and the new government was no longer interested. So the system was disconnected, but it was actually one of the pioneers in promoting environmentally friendly behavior through complementary currencies. In Belgium has a number of very similar schemes at the moment. One in the province of Limburg is this e-portemonnee. Now the name has changed, but the idea is very much the same. You take your stuff to be recycled, and you get points. And with these points, you can do things like go to the swimming pool of the municipality, you can enjoy parks, you can travel in the buses of the city. So it's a very similar idea, well, more adapted to our more modern lifestyle, perhaps, but the idea is always the same. And in combination with local income generation, let me talk a little bit about the case of Argentina, because this is the one that I'm specialized on. During the crisis of 1998 to 2001, 2002, there were hundreds of these vouchers. I put a photo of, I don't know, about 20 here, but you have to think that there were hundreds all over the country, and people were able to sell cakes, repair bikes, but then there were more sophisticated things, because during this crisis, a lot of people were unemployed, so you could get dental treatment because the dentist has to eat at the end of the day, and he or she would still receives this colored paper, these vouchers, and he or she would buy cakes and all sorts of food that were homemade, homemade cookies, homemade pizzas, etc. homemade toiletries, cleaning products, anything that could have been produced at home was part of the system. And at some point in Argentina, there were 2.5 million households members of this system or participating in this system. What did they buy and sell? The variety is immense because not only it's what we can produce at home, but it's what we can repair, services that we can provide, and also lots and lots of stuff that we have at home and we don't use, that we receive them or that we have entitlements to receive, perhaps from somebody that gives it to us and we can sell it. So this very local exchange was just massive. As I said, it's 2.5 million people. If you think about it, it enabled lots of households to actually survive through one of the worst crises that the country has ever had. And something very similar is also in Kenya. This is a photo of Mombasa, one of the biggest slums in Kenya, where somebody came up with a very similar idea. This type of vouchers, this currency was called Bangla Pesa. Now this system has been changed into a larger network called Sarafu. This is about 10 years old. I think they just had 10 years last year. So the Sarafu allows you to exchange things. Again, in these places in Kenya, they are also in Nairobi, they are in Kisumu, in several cities in Kenya. Ouch. I'm not sure why my pictures are jumping today. Anyway, again, you have very small businesses exchanging things with each other. This has catalyzed the local economy of the slums in incredible ways. It had the multiplier effect in this locality has been between 2 and 3 times the amount of money that was actually issued. And it has allowed lots of people to send their children to school and pay the school fees. Okay, now before I say thank you, one of the things that I think I want to emphasize also is that while it's a very simple idea, it's a very powerful notion, creating money. And what is interesting is that it's an idea that various communities in different countries of the world actually come up with, like reinventing the wheel, when in fact this would have been a lot more effective if all communities could learn from each other. So I've had a couple of students that have started their own community currencies in their places. So if any of you actually wants to says, well, we can do this, at school, in the university, there are several community currencies that are active in universities. Please inform yourself. There's a lot of information because that's how we can learn, collectively. And I would like to mention again the IJCCR, the International Journal of Community Currency Systems, and there's a lot of information there also on how to start your community currency system. And now I say thank you, gracias, for your time, and I stop sharing. And I would love to get questions. Thanks.
Yeah, well, thank you very much, Dr. Gomez. I gotta say, like, I've been studying economics and specifically like the evolution of money and the concepts surrounding money for a good 3 to 5 years now. And I've only ever heard of currency plurality or complementary currencies last spring. So like 4 to 6 months ago. And it's changed my outlook on a lot of things. And I'm happy to lead off the question session here while Christina collects questions from everybody else. And to our audience, please don't be shy. Type your questions in chat, and then we will get to them as we usually do. But I am happy to lead things off. So one of my questions is, why is it that you think we lost currency plurality in the first place? Like, as a species, this was a commonality up until the 19th century.
Well, it was, as I said, we haven't quite lost it. It's just that if or most economists, we, as I say, you learn in page one, well, money is this thing that comes from the state. This immediately hides our ability to see all the other things that we use as payments or as means of payments or as reserve of value. If you go to poor rural communities in many parts of the world, you are surprised to see that farmers save in animals. So that little goat that is walking there is not something that the family is going to eat. It's their savings account on four legs. Yeah. So there are many, if you go to slums, you see that there's a lot of what looks like garbage. And again, it's not like people like to live next to the garbage. That's their savings account. It's what they can say, they can sell when they need money. If somebody gets sick, you know. But I think that mainstream economics, I don't want to offend anybody, but I think somehow mainstream economics trains us to see only the savings that we keep in the bank when a lot of things happen outside the banks. And if you think that about 1/3 of the world population uses banks, then I mean, we need to find out how do the other 70% of the world population make payments, save, etc. Mobile phone payments, I think, has been a very interesting push into that direction. Afterwards, Bitcoin, and then there are these ones that, in fact, do not have the economic goals in mind as a priority, but also reconnecting with each other. No? So if you ask me, why don't we hear more about these things? I think it's because we are not trained to see them, and there has been actually the German central bank, when it still existed. There is one scheme in the south of Germany, in the Chiemgauer area, and the central bank said, "Oh, these people are trying to make money. What's going on here?" So before forbidding them, they said, "Well, we want to commission a research." And the consultant came back with the answer saying, oh, they are too small, don't worry about them. Yeah, so with this, they are too small, it sounds like nobody cares. But for the reconnection of this community, it's in a relatively beautiful mountain area with a lake, the Him, etc. It's really important to keep their identity, their own means of payment, to promote the buy local. So for them, it is important, even if in the nationwide GDP of Germany, it must be like 0.00% of the GDP, 0.0001, you know, of the GDP. But as human beings, it's really important. So what are we looking at the human-centered economy or as the GDP-centered economy? And if it's the second one, then this is an odd idea that doesn't matter. But if it's the former, this is who we are. Yeah. So how we live, how we get our food from, and how we get to know our neighbors. So yeah,
Oh,
sometimes
thank you
it's
very much.
difficult to break up from the training we have received. No?
Mm-hmm. No, thank you. That's a very, very interesting thing to think about. I also one concern that came up in some of the case studies in your book was uh, there's sometimes in poorer areas these currencies are so successful, but these people are also isolated to that area. So it because their currency is only good in that local economy or in that one province, it limits people from traveling. Is there any way that you can think of that, I guess, by maybe more global recognition that might be able to make community currency exchangeable or allow people to travel with it?
Uh, it's a difficult question, you know, because for example, in the ones that were really big, like in Argentina, you could travel, you could do 3,000 kilometers and still pay your food with these funny colored papers, yeah. But this creates issues of trust. What will I get with this piece of paper? Will I still get something somewhere else? So this was actually one of the weaknesses. So can it scale up? Yes, but is it a good thing? I think it creates another set of challenges. Um, so perhaps this doesn't work beyond the small scale of trust, of strong identity, and so on. And the case of Kenya, I think, is also very interesting because they tried with the Sarafu, they tried to connect all the small cases in Kenya via a kind of a reserve in Sarafu. So if you were in Kisumu, which is far away from Nairobi or from Mombasa, you could still exchange via exchanging in the middle into Sarafu and then back into your own local currency, no? And this was possible with a series of algorithms that calculated the exchange rates between your local currency and the Sarafu daily, but it was so complicated. And most of these organizations do not have lots of resources. The use of blockchain is expensive. Everybody thinks that it's a very free, open technology, beautiful, but it's very expensive. So actually this is something that they could not afford. So it would have been possible to scale via these new technologies, but it's costly. So I have my doubts on whether they can scale and whether they should scale. Yeah, so I'm not. I would love them to see them scale, but I think that there's a set of challenges out there that need to be considered as well. It's not for free. It's like blockchain is not for free. Yeah, there's a materiality in this thing that has costs.
Yeah, sadly.
A very tough question because one is it realistic? Is it possible? And the other one is it desirable?
Yeah, that's that's the issue. I was like, well, it can be done, but
It can be done. It can be done. Yes, the technological possibilities are there, but is it the idea?
yeah, that's actually a good segue to my next question. Then, like, how would you describe Bitcoin or Ether as community currencies? Do you think they quite fit the mold, or are they too competitive
No,
with other systems?
I have mixed feelings because on the one hand, what I like is that it has brought up the question of what is money, yeah, and why central banks and banks in general, that they multiply money, why they are so powerful. And why do we pay our banks to make a transaction? We pay for our bank account, for our accounts, and each time we move, if I want to make a payment to you, I have to pay my bank. For what? For a software transaction, yeah? And what Bitcoin has done is to reopen the question of what am I really paying my bank to do? And I think that is a really challenging and critical way of thinking again about money. On the other hand, no, I would not describe it as a community because who is Bitcoin? We don't know who is the creator. There is a paper somewhere by a foundation that has a Japanese name, but in fact it seems they are Russian. We don't know very well. So who is behind Bitcoin? All the possibilities of, I think they are a bit overrated, but yeah, speculation and helping drug dealers make payments around the world. I think this is a little bit a myth, but it's there, certainly. So, and I don't see the community. To what extent are people reconnected by using Bitcoin? So, as I said, I have mixed feelings. There are so many things so many aspects on which I say, oh yeah, Bitcoin or Ethereum. Any Bitcoin is just one of a very big family of cryptocurrencies. But where is the community there? They serve a purpose. I think Bitcoin definitely serves a purpose, and I'm supportive of that. I'm surprised you haven't asked me about the digital currencies of central banks that are now, the big hot topic that some banks are coming up with this idea, and it does look that like they are going to rid us or free us to some extent of regular banks. Let's wait and see for that one. We'll
Mm.
ask me in 2 years. Let's talk about 2 years to
Yeah,
see.
we'll have you back again in 2 years to discuss that.
Yeah.
That's but I don't want to hog all your time with my questions. I did want to hand it over to Christina, who's been uh, managing some of the questions that our audience has given. So let's go directly to the audience now. And Christina, feel free to take it away.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Gomez and Mike. Such a great presentation and so many great questions in the chat as well. And so we'll jump right into those. The first question was from Larissa. And so she wanted to know who the issuers were for the Argentinian case study that you provided. And a follow-up question on that, she'd love to hear more on whether the tokens were interchangeable. And so maybe that's the first set of questions from Larissa. And then from Clara, her question was, given the Swiss case of the SME credit currency, could you clarify the difference between an insurance system and a CCS system?
Okay, yeah. It's very different questions. Let me go to Larissa's first. Well, the ones in Argentina started a little bit before the crisis, but in a moment when there was also high unemployment, etc. And it was three persons that started exchanging without money. So what they did was the neighbors would come into a garage on Saturdays and they would bring something to sell. So it could be vegetables they grew at home, toiletries they had at home, whatever, the secondhand toys of the children that had grown up, they would come into this garage on Saturday with products, and they more or less gave it a price, and then everybody would more or less take out for the same price. And this was just accountancy record. So Larissa would bring something XX for the value of 100. So Larissa takes home something for 100. Yeah. So at the end of each Saturday, we all go back to zero. So what happens? In the middle of the crisis and a lot of unemployment, a lot of people could start having things, small luxuries or jams, marmalades, things that were like a little extra in their life. So this grew up very quickly. But with the system I described, that everything happens in a garage, they hit the limit very, very within weeks. Yeah. So they started saying, well, how do we do it? So they found a bigger space. And then it was, even in the bigger space, there was too much accountancy. And at some point they said, oof, why don't we make money? And they wrote on pieces of paper, 5, 10, 20, whatever. This was a bit organic. Nobody had a clue that they were making money. The label complementary currency systems was not within the knowledge of these people that had started it. Who were they? An environmentalist NGO, a group of friends, actually, a group of neighbors. Now, when this idea grew, it started being, the parish committee, the school committee. Afterwards, the municipalities participated. Afterwards, the government supported it. So as a matter of fact, I cannot give you a simple answer, because anybody that needed to exchange goods and services and that did not have the money to do this would start one. And this had another very interesting gender effect, because actually women are closer to what the household needs, not to what the household earns, which is usually money, and it's usually in the hands of the male breadwinner. But what do we put on the table to eat tonight? That tends to be a question that in a country like Argentina, it's still females who are going to do that. And because of that, it was females that were the vast majority of participants in this system. And this was a network of women, and many women that would say something like, oh, I helped my husband, I don't work. They took care of 5 children, but they still describe their lives as I don't work. By the way, this is a quote. This is quotes, I'm not inventing it. And they started being community leaders, organizers. They were the ones that said, let's bring this to my village, to my neighborhood. So it had a very interesting gender impact in terms of what women could do, were allowed to do before and after, you know. In Brazil, there were 150 community banks at a certain point. The very first one was Palmas. This was, again, a community of very, very poor people. The key organizer, I would say, was somebody that was going to be a priest, then left the priesthood and got married. So this couple, when the story is a bit long, but to make it short, this couple were the ones that said, look, we need to stop crying here. We need to start organizing. And they mobilized quite a lot of people in this community. At some point with the government of, with Lula, there was a minister, Paul Singer. He liked the idea of the social, is or was, I'm not sure if he's alive, big reference in the social and solidarity economy. And he actually promoted community banks in Brazil. So there was government money to replicate the idea in lots and lots of places. But it's usually community associations, in the case of Brazil, that started. Many of these community banks, by the way, are still ongoing. They haven't died. The University of Sao Paulo, the National University of Sao Paulo has a community currency ongoing. Who are they? Community-based organizations, but it could be people with leadership, you know. Now, the VIR case in Switzerland, can I still find the question? I'm sorry, I don't remember what was the question now.
The question was, given the Swiss case of the SME credit currency, could you clarify the difference between an insurance system and a CCS system?
Yeah. It's not an insurance system because nothing is insured. It's a counter-cyclical mechanism that is there for the SMEs that are, yeah, you are right to say that most of them are, most of the members are SMEs. In fact, I didn't say that, but Clara is right on this point. It's not an insurance. It's just that in a moment in which your company is experiencing a crunch, credit crunch, or a crisis of whatever origin, you know that you could get a bit of credit from the other members in this network to be able to keep your company ongoing. And using banks, I insist on this point, is expensive. So this may be a much cheaper way of getting the supplies that you need to produce. So they do provide some insurances, but the core business of VIR is actually to give credit and to facilitate credits and debts among members. So they do, as I said, they do provide a bit of insurance services, but this is not the core issue of VIR. Now, if you know that you, in the case of a big crunch, somebody, you know, VIR is going to stand by you, of course, this can allow you some certain behaviors in your business that, you know, certain certainties that it plays like an insurance. I'm not sure if this is the question that you were asking, but it's not like you have an insurance for, you know, against fire if your company burns, or it's not like that. Oh, and by the way, this has a collateral in Swiss francs. So in case there's a collapse and companies do not pay back, the money will not, the complementary currency will survive because there is a collateral in this case.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, maybe that's where the confusion came from.
Thank you. We'll move to the next set of questions. So two from Ajibola and one from Clara. So the first is, can we safely conclude that to successfully have currency plurality, there is a need for solidarity among like minds? That is a question from Ajibola. And from Clara, the idea of solidarity and community seems to be very present in the CCS examples you mentioned. However, how would you address moral issues or questions of social inequality with regard to complementary currencies like the one in Brazil? Isn't it a mechanism to force especially the poor to act accordingly to the logic of the currency? And then a third question related to Brazil is, building on the Brazilian example, which you cited, is there a need to promote advocacy for supportive legal framework for the sustainability of currency plurality? So a number of questions, but I think we have a solidarity theme and then looking at Brazil specifically.
Yeah, there isn't a lot of inequality within these systems. I've studied quite a bit, and whether you go to see how they work in Spain or in Italy or in Kenya in the slums or in Argentina or in Brazil, there's not a lot of inequality within the systems. You do not, they are not multi-class or multi-social strata spaces. Of course, there's no homogeneity either, because then if everybody's extremely poor, there's nothing to exchange. So you do have a bit of diversity, but you do not have these huge inequalities. There's no Bill Gates in any of these complementary currencies. So this is one thing. The second one is there is a reason why you decide to become a member. So either you feel you're aligned with the values that it expresses. You're in favor of an alternative economic movement or for degrowth, for you want to buy local, therefore reduce your carbon footprint. So there is something that takes you there. If you go only because you're poor and you have no other means of surviving, you still have to produce something. And it's, you know, when you start exchanging things, you get to know the people that you buy and sell from. So solidarity may not be a very strong thing in the beginning, but it grows because people get to know each other by exchanging, and it develops. Yeah, I think one of the characteristics of the solidarity economy is that you may not start. Not everybody feels. You know, altruistic towards the other in the beginning, but once you are there, you start feeling the group pressure to behave in ways that are aligned with what this group has in common. So if you're a newcomer and you may say, I don't know these people, all I want is to get my vegetables and go home, you will soon find out that you can't. So either you leave after the second meeting, or you start building these bonds with the people around you. So yes, you are right that solidarity is key. Now, if you are talking about thousands of members, like in Bristol, it had 2,000 members after the first year, you're probably not going to feel, you know, not all 2,000 members are your friends. But if you are there, as I said, it's because something took you there, that there is beliefs and values inside of you that have taken you there and that you share with others. Yeah. So you need a certain threshold of this to start: values, solidarity, ideology. You can call it whatever name you like or is appropriate for your context. And then it should build up. And if it doesn't, that's where people get disappointed and leave. And perhaps the whole scheme dies because it doesn't take off. No? So yeah, the idea of solidarity is very, very central. In fact, I think it was Clara or Ajibol, I'm not sure who asked the question, but it's definitely there, or it has to get there. It has to be built. Otherwise, this is not going to live for long. But even in a very business-oriented system like VIR, they still say, "As we the Swiss," and you say, "Who is we the Swiss?" You know, but they still use these expressions very much. In the case of Sardex in Sardinia, they started because somebody well, pestered his friends. Basically, the leader kept on telling his friends who had businesses, please participate, please participate, please participate, until people, said, okay, yes, register me in your network. And this was the beginning of Sardex. It was somebody who basically had a good network of friends in an island. I think this is easier. And then others said, oh, this is a good idea. And then they joined. But I don't know, is this solidarity? Perhaps it's not the most beautiful idea of solidarity that we can think of, but it's still people using and mobilizing their networks. And then they asked me about Brazil. Well, actually, I'm still discussing with my colleagues in Brazil whether the government support was a blessing or a curse, because people started doing things not out of believing, not out of solidarity, but out of, well, how do we get the money? Yeah, and this actually, well, it was a bit contrary to the spirit of the community banks. So do we need to promote them? I think we need to inform that this exists, what this does, what it doesn't do, but maybe not to throw money on this, because money is necessary, but it can also pollute in a way what some of these currencies want, what some of these communities want to achieve. So, well, do we need to promote them with advocacy? I think we need to inform, yes, but we should not fall into the trap of trying to say that this will solve the problems of the world, because then we will have a lot of disappointment at the end of the rally, So yeah, so I think it's important to build as academics, as scholars that we are, it's important to build instruments that would allow us to see and to capture these social phenomena. But I don't know, the word advocacy doesn't quite convince me. It doesn't hit the right key there, I think.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Gomez, for your response, and to Clara and Ajibola for your questions on solidarity. I see here in the chat from Ajibola that it has inspired a new paper, and so we're looking forward to that. The more research and the more conversations we can be having, the better. So those are all the questions that we have in the chat. If anybody maybe wants to pose a direct question to Dr. Gomez, now is your opportunity, or ask any follow-up questions, you're welcome to do so directly. Any takers at this point?
Okay, well, since you are from South Africa, I have to say to you that they also existed. I don't know if they exist still now, but it was called Brand, Rand. And the story of this is that the Rand is the official currency, and this was the Rand, but it was also brand. It's what burns, it's fire. Yeah. So it was, they had a beautiful launch saying this is the currency that burns, but in a good sense. I mean, not like you'll get, you will burn your fingers, but this is the fire inside. Yeah. So the case of South Africa was also very, very nice. That's good for you because you said you were from South Africa.
Yeah. Yes, I am from South Africa, and we have another person from South Africa I just noticed in the call as well. And so yeah, it's a very interesting case. And I guess maybe one last question for me is that I noticed in the book on money plurality, there was quite a number of case studies from Argentina, Brazil, as you've already mentioned, Italy, Canada, and Japan, I think was the other one, which was very, very interesting. And I guess maybe very similar to what Eleanor Ostrom did with, when she looked at common pool resources, she looked at all these different case studies and then drew certain principles from each of the case studies to sort of distill principles that you need in order to develop the right kind of management for common pool resources. And so I'm wondering if there is something like that we can, or certain principles, base principles that we can withdraw from all of these different case studies, that we can say you need these particular principles in order to have a complementary currency system that works. And so I'm not sure in your research, if you've seen across these different case studies, what would you say are the maybe sort of 3 or 4 principles that you've distilled to say these are the baseline that you need in order to have a flourishing complementary currency?
Yeah, that's a wow, that's a very good question. Some of these complementary currencies are commons. So what you see as principles for the commons to work, the 8 principles, I think it was, of Elinor Ostrom, they would also apply. But in general, I would say it's the first one is clarity of what you want to obtain. Are you trying to change behavior? Are you trying to create different sources of livelihoods? Because depending of what you want to get, why motivates us, you would also design your currency differently. So for me, the first one is the clarity of what we are trying to do. The second one, who are the who are the bigger fish, in this pool? Because in many of these schemes, you have municipal governments, you have relatively larger businesses. So to identify the inequalities in a way, and why is this so important? Because you see that there are some traders, some participants that trade a lot more than the others, and this means they will accumulate a lot more of the currency. In the time bank of The Hague, for example, it's a hairdresser. Everybody wants to have a haircut with her. But the problem is that she cannot spend in the same speed as she gets the payment. So how do you get this person to spend? Otherwise, she accumulates the currency, and this has to circulate. So second question, what are the differences or the diversity of the heterogeneity among these players, the members? Who would risk accumulate? Where would the money stop flowing? And the third point for me, it's the circle. In the one of South Africa, for example, they got quite a good number of households together saying what comes into my household, what goes out, and to see if they actually did a risk assessment, if you want to call it like that, saying, do we have a match here? Yeah, because if what everybody offers is the same and what everybody needs is the same, but there is nobody to supply it, then you won't be able to create this circuit. So is there a match? Yeah, are there going to be enough needs and offers to be able to have this match within this group? And for me, those three are in fact the most important ones. The rest is a bit obvious. Who does the collective action? What are the clarity of the rules? What is allowed of sanctions? How are sanctions and disputes going to be resolved? All the usual issues of collective action are of course there. But for me, the three that I mentioned before are the place where you start. Yeah. Thanks for that question, and thanks for all the fantastic questions. It really helps me think through, and yeah, I expect submissions, of course, sure, in the journal. That would be fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you. No, thank you so much, Dr. Gomez. We've learned so much. Really, really incredible. And on that note, I'll hand over to Michael. If you have any other questions, if you want to wrap it up, then I think we're almost done. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christina. Yeah, we have kept you a little bit more than an hour there, Dr. Gomez. So thank you so much for being with us. And thank you very much to our audience for coming out. And I posted this project to Christina. I really didn't think it would get the attention that it was getting, but I'm flattered. And again, thank you so much, Doctor, for being willing to come out and speak on this, because not enough people know about complementary currencies or the concept of currency plurality. And something I found very fascinating in your book was the case studies that showed even people who were not familiar with complementary currencies in the tests and the simulations, once they became aware of how they affected it, it greatly changed their mindset towards it. It seemed conclusive that everybody, even the very rich and the very wealthy, thought this was a better economic model. So it was fascinating. So with that, I suppose, unless anybody's got any last minute things they want to say, I will conclude this meeting, and I suppose we all now owe you 1 hour of our time. So please feel free to reach out to any of us at any time.
Okay, okay. Sorry if I talk too much, but
No,
yeah.
please, we're here to listen to you.
Okay, no, thanks for the opportunity. Thank you so much for listening. Yeah.
Alrighty, and just before we part ways, I will say, please stay tuned, everybody who wants to catch the rest of the Financing the Future series. On Tuesday, we will be having Professor James A. Robinson, co-author of Why Nations Fail, and his new book, The Narrow Corridor. He's co-authored with Daron Acemoglu, who I know some of you are familiar with, and we will be discussing the concept of extraction in current monetary systems. So I hope you all will join us for that. And Dr. Gomez, if you're available, we'd love to have you in the audience and maybe share some of the insights that you have as well on that topic.
Yeah, sounds interesting. I'll have a look. Oops. Yeah, I need to have a look at this email when it comes. Thank you.
All right. And I suppose I will bid you all adieu then. So thank you all for coming, and farewell.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Take care. Thank you, Dr. Gomez. Thank you, everyone. Have a good day. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Okay, I think we can stop recording.